Suresh, welcome to Singapore.
Thank you very much.
I guess though it might not be a new city or first time to you, but first time with Sysdig?
Yeah, this is my first visit as part of Sysdig.
Amazing. I'm sure you are looking forward to this region,
Yeah, very much so. I think our investment in Singapore, India is only about 5-6 months old now, or maybe I would say 6-7 months old, and lots of exciting sort of opportunity ahead. So I'm looking forward to it.
I must say one observation that among the so many open source companies that we work with, Sysdig is the one that is really investing in this region really in a, I would say, early stage, but not many companies have shown that vision to invest that early. So
I think when we thought about this even a year ago, it did feel the question that was in our mind was, are we going in too early? Should we wait for market maturity? And maybe partly because our customer base typically tends to be large global organizations, and so we're focused on the global 2000. And if you then say across Southeast Asia, across India, are there 50, 60, 100 large organizations that are starting to adopt cloud native technologies, then I absolutely believe there's enough opportunity to justify the investment and perhaps build brand mindshare early in the market.
That's great to hear. I mean, and especially coming from open source company.
Yeah,
it is fantastic to see.
No, for sure.
Thinking ahead of the market. So wonderful. So can you tell us about Sysdig's story? I mean, it's been there for some time, but the whole story.
Yeah, so we started as an open source project in 2014. The open source project called Sysdig, founded by created by our founder Loris. So just background, Loris happened to be the creator of an open source project called Wireshark in his prior life. Wireshark is one of the most well-known open source network packet analysis tools. Over 100 million downloads, extremely widely used for debugging protocol performance through the network packet layer, for threat detection at the network packet layer, for forensics, and so on. So when the company he started around Wireshark got acquired by Riverbed, the concern that Loris had was, in a world where applications move to the cloud and I can no longer have access to network packets, and as applications move towards containers where I can't deploy an agent inside the virtual machine, how do I get the rich data to do things like performance monitoring, troubleshooting, threat detection, forensics, compliance? And so that really was the question that led to the founding of Sysdig. And the big idea was quite simply that in a cloud world, in a containerized world, system calls within the kernel or kernel instrumentation is the moral equivalent of network packets. If there was some way to tap into system calls within the kernel, then you can really extract extremely rich data that gives you the same kind of insights that network packets used to give you for the use cases that I mentioned earlier: monitoring, troubleshooting, threat detection, forensics, and so on. So that was really the starting point for Sysdig.
That was a very clever way of taking your work forward in a new environment.
Indeed, very much so.
Oh, wow. So what do you see now what is the big problem that Sysdig is really solving for the business community or for the enterprise?
So it's useful to sort of describe it through the lens of our customer. So typically our insertion point into enterprises is when they are starting their journey towards containerized microservices as their next generation method for building applications, if you will. And what we generally find is that often most organizations are forming cloud teams or container platform teams to sort of embark on this journey towards containerized microservices. They start deploying Kubernetes, they start deploying container platforms, make that available to the developers. You get to a point where you have a few dozen containerized nodes, your first set of applications are now going into production. Very quickly, what you realize is that my legacy tools for monitoring do not have visibility into my containerized environment. So I don't have a very good way of understanding when I have a performance bottleneck. I don't know how to troubleshoot applications when they have performance challenges. That's from an operational perspective. Perhaps even more significantly, as you're taking these applications into production, security becomes a significant concern, and you realize that network traffic between containers doesn't even go through a firewall. My file integrity monitoring tools do not have visibility into file accesses. So security tools become blind in a containerized world. And that, in a nutshell, is the problem we're trying to solve. How do we make sure that DevOps teams that want to monitor for performance, capacity, and health on the one hand,
Yes.
and security and compliance on the other hand. How do they have a platform that they can use for solving those problems? That's the problem we're trying to solve.
And we fully see most of the time when customers start thinking about scaling out their containers beyond initial experiment, the first thing in the conversation is always security.
Right.
Because customers think, and I think it is true also, with the containers and with the microservices architecture nowadays, you have north-south and east-west traffic.
Right.
Customers are worried about it, that do I know what is happening?
Yes, very much so. Give you a couple of examples. One of the largest investment banks globally is a customer of ours, and they have over 20 different use cases they deploy Sysdig for. One of the things that caused them to get really worried and start exploring Sysdig was the idea that they used to poll their infrastructure every 60 seconds to try and understand sort of metrics around the infrastructure for security purposes. And what they realized was that within 60 seconds, a container could come and disappear, and you would have no trace of the activity within that container.
Right.
And that was a gaping hole from a security standpoint if you're relying on polling every 60 seconds to understand what's going on.
Right.
And then when you think about sort of where does security therefore lie, so clearly security is a big concern. What's also changing is that with modern application development, security is moving from being a function outside in a separate office more towards development and upstream.
True, exactly.
So one really large web scale company actually I thought described it extremely well. This is the DevOps team, the DevOps leader of that team. Mm-hmm. It's a really large, very well known brand that's basically doing cloud scale app-based products. And his comment was, I have 5 things that I think of as part of my observability charter. How do I make sure that my applications are healthy, i.e. they are available? How do I make sure they're performing well? How do I make sure that I have the capacity for scaling? So that's more of my operational concerns. Increasingly, I think of how do I make sure that my environment is secure, and how do I make sure that I'm running in a compliant manner as also falling within my charter. So DevOps teams, I think of health, performance, capacity, security, and compliance all as things that they need to make available within their platform, within the container platform they're deploying. And that really is a great opportunity for us.
And I would say all of these 5 things that you mentioned in real-time mode.
Correct. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Earlier, you would have your security measures and you would review them end of the day maybe,
right,
or maybe quarterly, monthly. Today, from what you have described, the challenge is I want to know everything in real time.
Very much so. One of our projects that is an open source project that we contributed to CNCF and that now has an independent community is something called Falco. And the entire purpose behind Falco is runtime threat detection. How do I make sure that if there are policy violations or security breaches taking place during runtime, I have real-time notification of those breaches and I can take action in a real-time manner against those notifications. And so very much so, it's all about making sure during runtime you have visibility into what's taking place.
Interesting. And you mentioned it's all started with open source in as a model itself, or was there a change to open source?
So the Sysdig platform, we basically are branding our product as the Sysdig Secure DevOps platform, is built on an open core model. What does that mean? So core open source projects are all building blocks of our platform.
Yes.
For troubleshooting, forensics, audit, Sysdig is the open source project that's a building block of our platform. For threat detection, Falco is an open source project that's a building block of our platform. For image scanning and vulnerability management, Anchor is an open source project that's a building block of our platform. And for monitoring, Prometheus is a building block that's part of our platform. So we use all of these open source projects. What's really unique is the way that we do our instrumentation to leverage these open source projects. The fact that we are able to extract enormous context from Kubernetes and from the cloud to all the metrics and events that you're gathering from our platform. But open source is very much the sort of a big part of our strategy.
And that's the core for go-to-market as well, I guess.
Very much so. I think it's great when you walk into a large organization and you mention Sysdig and someone in the room says, I've used Sysdig for troubleshooting, right? Or now when you walk into a large organization that's already deployed Falco and they're looking for a supported sort of product behind Falco, There are more and more companies coming behind Falco, and so very much of a go-to-market benefit.
Your credibility is established.
Indeed, you walk in this branding awareness.
If you have, it's a good project. People have used it. They know it is great.
That's right.
So it creates that instant connection with them.
Very much so.
And that is what we see every time customers call us. Because they say you are carrying open source technology.
Yes.
So come and talk to us.
I think what Ashnik is doing, which is surrounding sort of yourself with open source technologies as a building block, it's the way that most enterprises are looking at what software they want to deploy. So a stack made up of open source totally makes sense to me.
Great. And do you see now that in Sysdig, in a growing space, containerization is of course a big space, but from a larger market perspective, how do you see Sysdig's position versus now everybody wants to have a pie of this market?
Right.
Everybody wants to repurpose their security platform and say we also can do container security.
Right.
They want to say, or they claim.
Right.
And these are big companies.
Right.
And in that space, how do you see Sysdig's position?
Yeah. So I think if I were to abstract it out, there are two classes of competitors. There's one class of competitor that tend to be legacy companies that are sort of competing for container security, for container monitoring. And generally speaking, our customers start by already saying, my existing solutions don't have a deep awareness of containers. They are starting to declare that they're sort of doing something around containers, but really they're not container native. They don't have a deep understanding of Kubernetes, which is perhaps even more important than just being container aware. And so I would generally say that our customers start off by acknowledging that legacy solutions do not carry over really well into sort of modern Kubernetes orchestrated container platforms. On the sort of newer vendors that are also started around the same time as we do, there isn't any single company that spans the set of use cases that we span, all the way from vulnerability management through compliance, through threat detection to audit and forensics and security, or infrastructure monitoring and service monitoring through troubleshooting. There's typically not a single vendor that spans all of these. We have point competitors in each of these. I think we are somewhat unique with the idea that observability and security are converging, but security is increasingly moving left towards sort of development and DevOps. And so that in that sense, we're unique. I would also say there are 2 or 3 attributes we generally find when we get into competitive engagements. Our largest customer has an environment over 100,000 servers where they're deploying us. And if you think about sort of roughly even 24 containers per server, you're talking about a 1 million container environment, right? And so we've proven at scale that we haven't seen other emerging companies, whether in security or monitoring, play at. And so scale is one that we understand really well. The second is the way we've instrumented, so it's a common platform for security and monitoring with a common agent and a common point of instrumentation. Our instrumentation is extremely good at 2 things. Enormously deep data, so when you want to know what happened to a container 8 days ago, it disappeared with leaving no trace behind. You want to know exactly every command that was executed, every file that was accessed. We can go back and have a forensic view into everything that happened.
True.
Right? And so our instrumentation is very good at extracting deep data and then marrying that data with rich context. Context as in which application, which user, etc. by using Kubernetes metadata.
It's a deep expertise that
Indeed.
Amazing. So it's interesting you mentioned how security is moving towards left, coming into the part of the developer ecosystem. And that is the same observation we have for all technology or all platforms.
Yeah.
Even database companies, they want to be talking to the developers.
Yes.
Container companies obviously want to talk to the developers.
Yes.
So I at times think the life of developer, it's many ways it is similar. If you go back to the old days, everything started with the developers. And network and other infrastructure guys came in much later. So same thing now happening. But I feel there is so much demand on developers' skills. What's your view about them, and how do you also see that challenge?
Yeah, so I will say for us, the first customer we think of as DevOps. And when we can solve the problem of the DevOps team really well, our customer's customer, which is developers, becomes our problem, right? And so as an example, when we walk into a large security deployment, typically we're working with the DevOps on instrumenting security policies for PCI compliance, NIST compliance, etc. Working with the developer. working with the DevOps team. And then we are also starting to say, here are events and compliance monitoring reports that we can make available so that developers will automatically know when their particular code has vulnerabilities and so on and so forth. Right? So I'll start by saying DevOps is the first customer. Now, DevOps is focused on making sure that developers who are their customers are satisfied. And to that extent, we have focused very much on making developers happy as well. I think of developers as sort of the influencer to more and more decision as the world is moving towards software. It's very true that they're becoming sort of the core audience.
Yes.
And there's a danger in that sort of there's an attention span that a developer has before, if the tool is not productive for a developer, they'll move on to the next more productive tool. And so the burden of building a great product that solves problem is that much greater.
Greater, exactly. And they have so many tools nowadays
Exactly.
for everything.
Exactly.
Because they want to automate, they want to make sure that they have right tools.
Exactly.
And they have made the right choice.
Exactly.
So
yeah, exactly. You get a short amount of time to make sure that you can demonstrate value with your product and usability of your product.
Yeah. Correct. But so you are here in Southeast Asia, so I'm sure there are a lot of customers' interest that you must be seeing. So through your visit, you've been to India as well. Through your visit, how do you see or compare the adoption of container or containerization in this part of the world by the companies here?
Yeah. So you know, the observation I would make is, let me start with just even the US market, where I think I really believe, if I look back 12 months ago, I would have described the market of customers that have sort of adopted Kubernetes at scale as measured in the hundreds of customers.
Right.
In just the span of a year, I can confidently say now it's in the thousands of customers. And so not too long before the customer base has grown by a factor of 4 or 5 in the space of a year. And in many ways, sort of as I've gone through talking to customers in India and as I'm talking to the sales team here, I feel like we are maybe a year and a half ago where we were in the US, where there are maybe 100 customers at scale when I look at India and Singapore that are basically already well on their way to containerization. I'm also equally confident that if we come back a year from now, I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking about several hundred customers at scale, because the benefits of containerization are so significant that if you're doing anything in the world of software development, it's a matter of time before you adopt containers as your platform of choice. And so to me, it's almost the risk of not being there when the market inflection happens is greater than the risk of having come in too early and therefore not being in the conversations.
Interesting, yes. And do you also see containerization being adopted not just as a faster go-to-market and things like that, but also as a strategy for multi-cloud environment?
Exactly. I think I would say, so the economic benefits are first and foremost speed of development, which is probably the single biggest one, and then cost being lower because your density of infrastructure can be lower. But if I take a business risk perspective and senior decision makers and why they like containerization, the idea that you're not locked into any one cloud provider's services and APIs and you can build once and deploy across clouds is absolutely a big driver of why containerization and Kubernetes is sort of the preferred model going forward. So multi-cloud is a big driver.
And we also hear from almost all banks and telcos that they are a technology company first nowadays.
Right.
So in that context, do you see containerization is at the core of the senior management's strategy for their organization?
Yeah, so I'm again taking a couple of examples of companies that are advanced. So I'll give you both the contrast, right? So one is one of the top 10 US banks, another one is one of the global top investment banks. In both those organizations, the customer that's the exec sponsor for us, in one instance runs all infrastructure, so compute, network, storage, and so it's at a very senior level that they are sort of very consciously thinking about containerization, and that's the executive sponsor that basically took Sysdig in. At the other top 10 US bank, they've built a platform for all modern applications. It's grown from less than 1,000 servers to over 5,000 servers, and this person that runs it reports into the CIO. So so the cloud platform team is very, very senior, and it's become sort of heavy mind share. At the same time, if I look at another large bank that we're just starting to get deployed in, they have 100 nodes deployed. This is their very first foray into containerization. Up until 6 months ago, they were on one particular Kubernetes platform and they changed to go to another Kubernetes platform. So they are very early in their journey. So if I were to step back, I would say 70% of people that do software development have already, I think, started the journey of containerization in Kubernetes. If I look though at how much of their infrastructure is containerized, I would say for the vast majority, it's single-digit percentages. So the opportunity is that everybody's doing something, you can engage, but the size of the deployments are still sort of very early. It's almost like VMware in 2003. That's the way I feel about sort of penetration, if you will.
And that means huge opportunity.
Indeed, that's how we view it. Yeah.
That is how one of our experiences recently has been. Customer has been on a very large bank on a microservices journey for some time, but they took a conscious decision that the reason for containerization has been to really have a multi-cloud strategy.
Right.
And we sense that it's high up on the senior executives' mind.
Very much so.
It's just a matter of their journey.
Yes.
How fast, and I think not more just how fast, but how fast they get the skills to do it.
Yep. Yeah, indeed.
That is the one challenge we see.
I think the biggest change that's driving, at least what I see as a more accelerated adoption, is a year and a half ago, we were just at the point of saying, okay, maybe Kubernetes is winning the orchestrator war, right? Now there are, not only has Kubernetes won the war, there are 4 or 5 really large companies that are basically platform vendors, right? And that have emerged with full-blown bets behind Kubernetes.
Exactly.
The 3 public cloud vendors, Amazon, Google, Azure are fully behind Kubernetes services.
Yes.
Red Hat IBM has now become a giant force behind Kubernetes. And VMware more recently has sort of turned full bore towards Kubernetes and sort of bringing Kubernetes to market. So you have these large providers who are able to augment the skills that a company needs to have. And so I think that will drive further adoption as well.
And not to forget the Docker, who has been there. Everybody's looking
Docker
for
started it in Docker Enterprise Edition. I have to say, it's still one where Docker EE is in so many large enterprises still. And so very much so.
Yes, so everybody's looking for Docker success.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for visiting Singapore, visiting Ashnik.
Thank you very much for having me as well.
And we look forward to see you again and more often.
Absolutely. No, it's a pleasure. First of all, thank you very much for the partnership. Ashnik has been so instrumental in taking an open source centric approach. For us, the partnership is really important. So thank you very much as well.
Yeah, thank you.